a corrections officer, the inmates she was supposed to be guarding, and a pregnancy that blew the whole thing wide open. Kayla Renner was 14 months into her job at a state prison in Pasco County, Florida, when investigators showed up in her parking lot one morning in May of 2021 with three things: a stack of messages pulled from a contraband phone she had smuggled in herself, a set of movement logs showing exactly where she had been, and when, and with whom, and the results of a paternity test. She had been sleeping with inmates on the block she was paid to supervise, not one, three, simultaneously, for the better part of a year. She had mapped the camera blind spots in the facility within weeks of starting. She knew which corridors weren't being logged. She knew which supervisors took the long route on their checks. She ran 3 prohibited relationships like a logistics operation, and she did it all while filing clean paperwork, passing her evaluations, and giving her supervisors absolutely no reason to look twice. Except, they had 9 reasons, 9 separate incident reports, filed by staff members who noticed something was wrong. 9 documented red flags sitting in a file that nobody ever connected into a picture until a routine benefits audit landed on the right desk, and a benefits administrator noticed that a woman assigned to an all-male housing unit had just filed a claim for an obstetrics consultation. That was what caught her. Not an investigation, not a whistleblower. A prenatal vitamin claim processed during a quarterly paperwork review. When the investigators approached her that morning and laid out everything they had, Kayla Renner didn't panic. She didn't deny it. She didn't say a word. She just smiled, turned around, and put her hands behind her back. Kayla Renner was 25 years old. Blonde, 5'4", a correctional officer, with 14 months on the job and a personnel record so clean it had never generated a single formal complaint. She had grown up 40 minutes from the facility she would eventually disgrace. She had wanted this job. She had studied for it, applied for it, trained for it. And then, according to court documents filed in Pasco County Circuit Court, she spent the better part of a year systematically dismantling everything she had built across 3 inmates, hundreds of messages on a contraband phone, and a pregnancy that made concealment impossible. This is the story of Kayla Renner, and it is also the story of a Florida correctional facility that was handed 9 separate opportunities to intervene and found a reason to do nothing with every single one of them. Kayla Marie Renner was born in Newport Richey, Florida, in 1997, the eldest of 2 children. Her father worked in HVAC installation. Her mother managed the front office of a pediatric dental practice. The family was church-going and stable, the kind of upbringing that produces people who understand responsibility and take it seriously. By all outward appearances, Kayla was exactly that kind of person. She attended Gulf High School in Newport Richey, where she graduated in 2016. Former classmates described her in terms that would later feel uncomfortably ironic, composed, self-directed, someone who always seemed to know what she wanted and how to get it. She played varsity softball for 3 years. She was elected to homecoming court her senior year. After graduation, she enrolled in the criminal justice program at Pasco Hernando State College and completed her associate's degree in 2018. She applied to the Florida Department of Corrections immediately after. The application cleared without incident. No criminal record, no flags. Her background interview, conducted at the regional hiring office in Tampa, produced one line of feedback worth noting. The interviewing officer wrote that the candidate presented with exceptional poise and appeared highly self-assured. She was hired in March of 2020, completed her basic recruit training at the FDOC Training Institute in Tallahassee, and reported for her first shift at Suncoast Correctional Institution on May the 11th, 2020. One detail from her training evaluation would not surface until after her arrest. An instructor at Tallahassee had noted that Kayla had a tendency to test the edges of permitted conduct during scenario exercises. Not dangerously, the evaluation said, but noticeably. The instructor had written, "Recommend supervisory awareness." That recommendation was not flagged during her placement review. Nobody at Suncoast was told to watch her any more closely than anyone else. Suncoast Correctional Institution sits on a flat stretch of land off State Road 52 inches Pasco County, roughly equidistant between Tampa and the Gulf Coast. The facility houses approximately 900 male inmates across 3 residential blocks at mixed custody levels. Kayla was assigned to B Block, a medium custody unit of 230 inmates. Her direct supervisor was Sergeant Ronald Vega, a 17-year veteran of the department who would later describe her as one of the more self-sufficient new hires he had worked with. She didn't need a lot of hand-holding, Vega said in a deposition taken during pretrial proceedings. She figured out the rhythms of the block fast, maybe faster than I realized at the time. What Vega did not know, what none of her supervisors knew, was what Kayla had been doing with those first weeks on the job. She had been studying the facility, mapping it, identifying which camera angles had gaps, which corridors generated foot traffic logs that were reviewed inconsistently, which supervisors took the longest routes during their block checks. She was not getting comfortable with her new workplace. She was conducting reconnaissance. The lead OIG investigator, who would eventually build the case against her, described her, in his summary report, as one of the more methodical subjects he had encountered in 11 years of investigating correctional misconduct. Not because of the nature of what she did, he wrote, but because of the visible deliberateness with which she prepared to do it. According to court documents, Kayla's first inappropriate contact with an inmate occurred in July of 2020, approximately 10 weeks into her employment. The inmate, referred to throughout the court record as Inmate 1, was 29 years old, serving 8 years for aggravated battery and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. In a sworn statement provided to investigators, Inmate 1 described the initiation as entirely one-sided. It started, he said, with small exchanges, questions about his case, comments on his appearance, eye contact during rounds that lasted a beat too long. Then she passed him a note during a cell inspection. The note contained a Snapchat username. The account, created under a false name, was accessed through a contraband phone that investigators would later determine Kayla had introduced into the facility herself. Over the following 6 weeks, the messages moved from cautious to explicit. On August the 3rd, she wrote, "I know this is insane. I also don't care. On August the 19th, I've figured out the Tuesday window. Nobody checks that corridor between 9:30 and 9:45 p.m. Trust me." On September the 1st, the night before their first physical encounter, she wrote, "Tomorrow, don't act different when you see me in the morning." Inmate 2 entered the picture in November of 2020. He was 24 years old, serving 6 years for grand theft auto and fleeing a law enforcement officer. His statement to investigators was brief and direct. "She came to me," he said. "I want that on the record. She came to me." Inmate 3 was the last. 27 years old, serving 9 years for drug trafficking. He would be the one whose cooperation finally broke the case open, but that comes later. Before any of it unraveled, Kayla operated across 3 simultaneous prohibited relationships for the better part of a year. She managed the logistics of all 3. She maintained her performance evaluations. She filed her paperwork on time. She smiled at her supervisors in the hallways of B Block and gave them no reason to look twice. Almost no reason. Because there were signs. There are always signs. The investigative file compiled by the Florida Department of Corrections Office of Inspector General would ultimately contain 9 separate incident and observation reports from Suncoast staff members who had noticed something about Kayla. Renner had taken the time to write it down. 9 reports. Not one of them produced a formal investigation. The first, dated October the 14th, 2020, was filed by Officer Denise Fuentes, who had observed Kayla in B Block's East Service corridor outside of her scheduled rounds. Kayla told Fuentes she had been responding to a reported noise complaint. No noise complaint had been logged that evening. The report was reviewed by Sergeant Vega, discussed with Kayla verbally, and filed. A January 2021 report flagged anomalies in outgoing calls from the B Block staff station on dates when Kayla was the officer of record, calls to a blocked number that didn't belong to anyone on the official contact list. The flag was sent to a communications supervisor, noted for follow-up, and never followed up on. In April of 2021, a veteran officer named Thomas Breck submitted a written observation stating that he had witnessed Kayla exchanging what appeared to be a small object with Inmate 3 during a controlled movement between housing areas. Breck described the exchange as brief and practiced the kind of handoff, he wrote, that suggested it had been done before. The report was received by the shift lieutenant's office, stamped, assigned a reference number, and generated no investigation. 9 reports, 14 months. The institution had been given the information it needed to act. It chose, at every turn, to do nothing with it. In late March of 2021, Kayla called in sick for 4 consecutive shifts. When she returned on April the 7th, a colleague who had worked alongside her for nearly a year noticed that something was different. She was quieter than usual, more deliberate in her movements. She sat alone in the staff lounge during breaks and stared out the window. That same week, a benefits administrator in the FDOC's Regional Human Resources Office was conducting a routine quarterly audit of employee medical claim submissions for the Suncoast facility. The review was not targeted. It was not the result of any tip or suspicion. It was paperwork. The administrator found a submission from Kayla Renner for an obstetrics consultation filed under her state employee health plan dated March the 29th. She was pregnant. The administrator flagged the submission to the facility's HR liaison, given Kayla's assignment to an all-male housing unit. A pregnancy required mandatory reporting under FDOC policy. The liaison forwarded the flag to the Office of Inspector General's regional contact. On April the 19th, 2021, the OIG opened a formal investigation. Investigators pulled her movement logs for the previous 14 months and cross-referenced them against the 9 incident reports in her file. 9 reports that, viewed together for the first time as a connected body of evidence, told a story that was nearly impossible to misread. They subpoenaed her phone records. They identified the Snapchat account. They obtained the messages. And then they sat down with inmate 3. He spoke within the first 40 minutes of questioning. He told investigators about all 3 relationships. He named the other inmates. He described the corridor on B Block's east wing, the timing, the camera gap, and then, unprompted, he said this: "She's pregnant, and she's been acting like it's not even a problem, like none of this is a problem." A paternity test was ordered on all 3 inmates. The results, returned in early May, confirmed that inmate 2 was the biological father of Kayla Renner's child. On May the 14th, 2021, Kayla arrived at Suncoast for the start of her morning shift. 2 OIG investigators were waiting in the parking lot. The exchange, captured on the facility's exterior surveillance camera, lasted 4 minutes. She didn't run. She didn't raise her voice. She listened to the lead investigator, a 20-year OIG veteran named Carlos Marrero, explain what they had, the messages, the movement logs, the paternity result, with an expression that witnesses later described as strikingly composed. When Marrero finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. Just once. Small. But unmistakable. "Okay," she said. "Just that." She turned and placed her hands behind her back before either investigator moved toward their cuffs. In his written account of the arrest, Marrero noted that in his experience, subjects at the moment of apprehension display fear, or anger, or denial. Miss Renner displayed none of these. She appeared almost relieved, he wrote, but not in a way that suggested remorse. More like someone who had finished a task and was ready to move on to whatever came next. She was handcuffed, walked to the investigator's vehicle, and driven to the Pasco County Sheriff's Office. She did not ask to call anyone. She did not cry. She did not say she had made a mistake. Kayla Renner was terminated from the Florida Department of Corrections, effective May the 15th, 2021. Her personnel file was permanently marked ineligible for rehire in any Florida law enforcement or corrections capacity. On June the 30th, a Pasco County grand jury returned an indictment charging her on 3 counts of unlawful sexual activity by a correctional authority figure, a second-degree felony under Florida Statute 944.35, along with 2 counts of introduction of contraband into a state correctional facility and 1 count of official misconduct. Her court-appointed public defender entered a not guilty plea at arraignment in July. Pre-trial motions ran through the fall. The defense challenged the Snapchat records on procedural grounds. The motion was denied. They argued the physical surveillance gaps meant the state couldn't confirm the conduct alleged. The prosecution responded by reading the messages aloud in open court messages in which Kayla had described, in her own words, exactly where the encounters took place, when they took place, and precisely how she had engineered the opportunity each time. On November the 8th, 2021, Kayla changed her plea to guilty on all counts. Her sentencing hearing was held on January the 20th, 2022, before Circuit Court Judge Angela Dewar of Pasco County. It lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes.